Flashpoint with Devin
Is the
Scillian.
case for impeachment stronger now or as flimsy as ever? We'll talk about it with Michigan Congressman Paul Mitchell.
Today at 10, only on Local 4.
The fall mattress sale at Art Van Furniture and Mattress continues. 0% financing up to 72 months. Tempur-Pedic just $28 a month. And Beauty Rest Black just $28 a month. Art Van Furniture and Mattress and all Pure Sleep stores. Shop it today.
Whatever you want.
Sign up for the Morning Report, a part of Local 4 newsletters. All the news you want right in your inbox.
Oh, cheesy slider, how much I adore. Diced onions, sliced pickle, perfectly placed cheese. American cheddar jalapeno, oh yes, please. Ooh, that's fine. Cheesy 10-sack for $6.99, only at White Castle.
The fall mattress sale at Art Van Furniture and Mattress continues with up to $1,000 off top name brand mattresses like Serta, Sealy, and Beauty Rest at $299. Memory foam only $399. Art Van Furniture and Mattress and all Pure Sleep stores. Shop it today.
Whatever you want.
The president doubles down. Under fire for his efforts to get Ukraine to investigate Joe and Hunter Biden, President Trump makes an out-in-the-open request to China. Michigan Congressman Paul Mitchell is here to talk about it. And why is it so hard to get a look at official documents in Michigan? We'll look at whether the state's FOIA laws need changing. Today is Sunday, October 6, 2019, and this is Flashpoint.
Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. Really glad you're with us this Sunday morning. And this Sunday morning, the scene in Washington is either reaching an impeachment boiling point or it's really nothing at all to worry about, all depending on your point of view. It's an extraordinary time, and it kind of reminds me of this dress. Remember this? Is the dress white and gold, or is it black and blue? Millions looked at it and saw it very differently, and isn't that pretty much where we are in politics in 2019? What color is the dress to you? It may have something to do with the news sources you frequent. We've become as divided in our media as we have in our politics. In fact, coming up a little later, we're going to talk about a terribly important journalism issue, the issue of FOIA, or Freedom of Information Act. Michigan generally ranks at the bottom when it comes to government transparency rankings. We'll talk about why and what can be done about it. But up first, Republican Congressman Paul Mitchell. He's so frustrated by the current climate that he's leaving after his current term. We know that. But before he does, it appears he's going to be asked to vote on impeachment. What color is the dress to him? He's up first this morning on Flashpoint. For so long, we heard the president say over and over again, no collusion, no collusion, no collusion. It's been his oft-repeated synopsis of the Mueller report, and yet now he seems to be saying, yes, I am colluding, and it is my absolute right. Let's talk about it with Republican Paul Mitchell of Michigan's 10th District, back with us on Flashpoint. Congressman, thanks very much for being here this morning.
Good to be here, Dave.
I don't know if anything has happened this week that has changed your thinking on what we've seen, but we've come a long way from the president telling us that he wouldn't collude with a foreign government to now telling us not only that he's been trying to do that with Ukraine, but he's urging China to help out.
Well, I think you've got kind of opposing narratives going on here. Let's be honest about it.
Sure.
You've got one narrative, we're trying to root out corruption, and another narrative saying, yeah, you're trying to use it as a political tool. I think we need to get all of the information, like the narrative from yesterday, the transcript from yesterday from Volker's appearance, or the other day, as well as anything. There's testimony going on today in Congress to find out what people are saying transpired through that situation in the Ukraine.
Do we really think there's much cover to say this was about corruption? I mean, that would be refreshing for the president to be concerned about corruption, given the way that he talks about Kim Jong-un, who by definition is one of the most corrupt creatures on the planet.
Well, China's a big issue too right now,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely. China, who we don't trust them with whether it's the value of their currency or intellectual property, and all of a sudden we want to trust their ability to investigate something?
Well, I think we have to recognize that impeachment is not a political tool. It is a pretty serious act. 4 times in this nation's history, we have gone to that tool. Yep. It's not something that we should do based on assumptions of what someone did or didn't do. We need information. We need all the information. There's been ongoing investigations now for 3 years. So at some point in time, I've said to some friends of mine in the Democratic Party, you also have a credibility crisis here, because how many times can you say this is impeachable, and you look at it like the Mueller report and say, no, it's not. So the question is, let's get all the information. Let's get all the information about this conversation that transpired, a series with Ukraine, and see if there's a there. right now hasn't done anything that's impeachable. The question is it underlying their problem?
Isn't part of the president's problem, though, the way that the story always shifts? I always thought what gave the Russian investigation so much life was all the lying at the beginning of it over who met with Russia, when, how many people, what they talked about. It was about adoption for a while, all these crazy things, which gets people who are in the investigative world up on their haunches. And that's kind of what we've watched happen this week. The president said that this was all hearsay, that the transcript, that the whistleblower's report did match the transcript. Now he's basically saying, yes, this is all what happened, but it's fine. I mean, isn't that the problem with the story when it shifts that way?
Well, I think the question remains is, was there a clear, what they say, quid pro quo, or expectation, if you do this, investigate, we'll help you in a variety of
Does that have to be there for this to bother you? It would be okay if there wasn't a string attached if he said, I want you to investigate Joe Biden?
That's not my role in Congress. I have to focus on that. My role in Congress is it a high crime or misdemeanor? Are there high crimes and misdemeanors? That's
which
the
is up
criteria.
to you to decide what the definition of it is.
There's a whole bunch of us. There's going to be 435 in the House to make that decision.
435 definitions.
And there will be 435. Now, some have already made that decision long ago. I mean, there are some that made the decision. Some of the Michigan delegation made the decision a long time ago. Some of us, obviously, at this point, had not decided that there wasn't that. We have to make that, but I think we have to do that with the American people recognizing why we've done it, and not just do it as a political hack job. Impeachment's not some political weapon. It is something that is a safety valve for the American people. When you've got someone in office that is clearly acting in a manner that is well beyond what anyone would accept, and that's the question we have to ferret out. Or apparently we do now, because we're well on that path now. I believe that the Democrats are I saw an article that was written, I think Nolan Finley did it, that the impeachment's on autopilot, just a matter of when. I think he's probably right.
It's interesting watching the Michigan delegation. We had Justice Justin Amash, who has become an independent, left the party. We've also got Fred Upton now saying that he thinks that the impeachment inquiry, or looking into these matters, is at least appropriate. But I'm curious as to whether you see much shift among other Republicans, or is everybody still very much locked into support of the president?
I don't know if it's a matter of locked in. It's a matter, I think, of waiting to get information. I think most of the delegation, at least my colleagues on the Republican side, say the same thing, which is, okay, if we're going to do this, then let's get all the information. Making decisions based on dribs and drabs, what's released and leaked and not leaked, is a terrible way to make decisions that are this important. This is historical stuff we're talking about here.
The president, of course, memorably said he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and he'd be fine. And I think a lot of people see the way that you have been an exception, and that you have been occasionally willing to call out the president for things. Some would say that's because you're not running for re-election.
I did that before that long ago.
But the president can do absolutely no wrong to a lot of his supporters. And that's interesting to me, because I don't know that we've ever had a president who could never do any wrong.
I can't speak for others. Long before I made a decision about running or not, it was actually in the first term. In my first term, I made a comment about the Charlottesville situation.
Right.
On
this program, as I
think it probably was.
Yes.
I think that I simply pick and choose my points where I think something's particularly egregious, rather than see if I can find something to criticize, because any given day we could do that on both sides of the aisle. For example, Kevin McCarthy, the leader of the Republicans, sent a letter to Nancy Pelosi about, okay, if we're going to do an impeachment process, then let's have a process that really provides both sides the ability to defend themselves, to move forward, based on historical precedent. And she basically sent back a letter that effectively said, go pound sand. The American people need to see that we're handling this in a responsible manner. And right now, let's be honest, we're really not, and that's troubling to me.
Should political calculations enter into this, though? I mean, if somebody should be removed, it's troubling, I think, to many, to those who were watching people make decisions about impeachment as to how it will reflect and improve or discourage their own political chances, what it means for the president's chances to stay in office. The president seems to say impeachment would be good for him. Either somebody should be out of office or not. Isn't that right?
That's part of the. You and I talked last time. It's part of the overwhelming problem in Washington. is step one is what's the political calculation. Step two is what are the talking points. Step three is how do I raise money. So the reality is no, it should not be. I've had conversations with a variety of people on this topic, and I believe we simply have to decide what the right thing to do is. What we define, each individual, there's 435 members. What is a high crime or misdemeanor? What is beneath the presidency that, in fact, someone doesn't deserve to be in there? That's the criteria, not whether or not it's politically advantageous.
Well, one of the things that has shocked me a little bit is that more of the president's supporters weren't willing to call him out for trashing the whistleblower and describing the whistleblower as a traitor and saying we used to deal with these kind of people in a different way. This is exactly why whistleblower laws were written, weren't they? To protect people who
saw
feel
my
like they need to come
commentary
forward.
on it, right? Senator Grassley and a couple others came out and said, no, it's exactly why whistleblower laws were put in place. And I believe we need to protect the whistleblower, whether you like what the whistleblower said or not, whether ultimately it's determined to be that they were playing political games or not. Without those laws, we have a difficult time protecting our nation, defending our Constitution. People have to have the ability to speak up, and then you make a determination whether they're playing games or not. Otherwise, we'll have a bunch of timid bureaucrats, and that's simply not helpful to our nation.
Lastly, have you got to guess where you think all this is headed? We'll have an impeachment vote.
Oh, I don't think there's any way that Nancy Pelosi can avoid an impeachment vote. I think we'll have one on the floor of the House. If I were betting, there will probably be a vote before the Christmas holidays, and she'll dump it over to the Senate to entertain McConnell and company over there. I think that's what will happen. The question is, let's do the responsible thing on this. Let's make sure the members, as well as the American people, have all the information, because they need to see us operate with the best interests of this country at our heart and not political opportunism.
Congressman Mitchell, it's always good to have you on the program. Thanks
good to see you.
for being here. You too. We'll continue with more on this. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. Back with more in just a minute.
What's better than free? 3 times free. Check out Michigan's largest mattress selection at Gardner White and get free power bases, free 4K TVs, and free same-day delivery. Sunday and Monday, you'll get the best prices and more free extras. This iComfort Queen, just $9.99 with the free power base. You save $900. Start sleeping cooler on Tempur-Pedic and the 4K TV is yours. Free. Now only $1 a day. Score a Restonic Queen with a free box spring cut to just $333. Don't overpay. Triple your savings. Only at Gardner White.
Wayne State University is offering a free program to help veterans prepare for college. It's called Veterans Upward Bound. Contact us today to get enrolled in a free 8-week college and career preparation course with a focus on computer skills, math, science, writing, grammar, Spanish, public speaking, or study skills. This is a great resource for veterans who are coming off a long break from the classroom. Call 313-577-9710. Find us on Facebook or visit us at educatingvets.com.
The Detroit Wayne Mental Health Authority has changed its name to the Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network. The name change reflects our holistic approach to care for all of the people we serve, those with mental illness, substance use, children with emotional disturbance, and people with disabilities, truly integrating mental and physical health. The Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network, your link to holistic health care. Here to talk, here to help, 24/7, 800-241-4949.
Delta Dental of Michigan is building brighter futures in Metro Detroit by supporting teachers, by investing in neighborhoods, by giving back day in and day out so we can all enjoy healthy, smart, vibrant communities. Learn about Delta Dental of Michigan and the work we're doing in your neighborhood at deltadentalmi.com.
All right, welcome back. Let's stay with the week in Washington, but let's also add the week in Lansing, which has been fascinating. Here to talk about it, Stephen Henderson from Detroit Today on WDET, and the former Majority Leader of the Michigan Senate, Randy Richardville. Let's start with Washington, guys. Randy, you have been an ardent supporter of this president. Has anything changed in the past week when you hear him asking for China's help in investigating Joe Biden?
No, I don't think so. He's a lightning rod of personality, you might say. He likes to bring the argument to his court, and then he fights it, and he usually does pretty well. It's an interesting tactic. I don't know.
Does it pretty well. He's about to be impeached.
He's not about to be impeached. I think they've just been talking.
He's going to be impeached. I don't know that he's going to be removed from office.
Well, of course
Is he
not.
going to be impeached?
Well, so what? And what does that do for anybody? All that is a waste of time, a waste of taxpayers' dollars. That's all that it is. Be impeached for what, really? I mean, just because the economy's doing so well, and because the joblessness has changed. We're doing a great job. The country's in great shape.
Well, Stephen, to that point, the saying is we have recall elections every 4 years.
We do.
Why bother with this?
Well, I mean, let's start with the Constitution. Let's start with the oath of office that this president took to defend that Constitution. Let's start with campaign finance law, which he's openly violating and was on the phone call and was on television. There are standards that preserve the institutions in our republic and have for the entire time it has existed. This is a president who, I agree with Randy, sometimes is trying to tweak his opposition by flouting those standards and saying, well, they don't matter so much. But here we're talking about very serious matters of state. He is the chief executive of this country. He's the chief diplomat of this country. He's also the head of the Republican Party. And those three things have to be kept separate in the mind of the president. They don't always, you don't always get to do all of those things. He is acting as a partisan in these other roles in a way we have never seen a president do before. That's why they're talking about impeachment. If he were any other public servant, he could be prosecuted for campaign finance violations for this kind of thing.
Jump in.
Bribery and extortion.
I'm going to sit back and let you two go at it here.
I just think we're going a little too far. As a person who is in a leadership role myself, I had people had a recall coming after me more than once. They started websites against me. I think they got 13 members to join that website and a couple hundred votes or signatures to try and recall me. It was just a waste of time. It was just bothersome more than anything else. And I don't think that it's genuine, that there's genuine seriousness to the degree that you're talking about.
Because why?
Just because it's not that important. We're moving along where everything's going well, and I don't even know that it's true.
So the intelligence community will say that the biggest threat we face right now is interference in our elections by foreign governments. You've had several intelligence officials talk about that in recent months. The president, meanwhile, is on the phone with a foreign leader saying, hey, I need your help in domestic politics in my country. I need you to investigate my chief political rival. I don't know which part of that doesn't, for you, rise to the level of absolute horror and outrage.
It seems to me damned if you do, damned if you don't. Okay, so supposedly we've got Russia involved in elections that nobody was able to say this really happened, and now he's reaching out someplace else.
Everyone says Russia was involved in the election.
Well, not everyone, because I can tell you right now, I don't think so.
Well, the Mueller report concluded that it did, and the intelligence community backed that up by saying, look, there is an effort, a serious
Do you really
effort
think
to
this is an
interfere
efficient use of taxpayer dollars to be saying, we've got these, pardon the pun, these trumped up charges against the president, talking about all these inconsistencies?
How are they trumped up?
Well, look, we got 11 months and you can vote him out of office.
But which part
so go ahead and vote him out of office.
Which part of the allegations here are not proven by his own words?
The general people in the United States don't care about this stuff. They want to get back to the business of getting this country running the way that it has been for the last couple of years.
The polls show that a majority of Americans want to know what happened here. Majority of Americans believe he was trying to reach out to the Ukraine to interfere in our elections, and they're concerned about that. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. Preserving the standards of the institutions of the Republic are just as important as what the economy is doing. They're just as important as reforming health care or gun reform.
Sure they are, but what I'm saying is the timing, so you've had 3 years to look at all the things that are happening, and take all the charges that came to this time, right now, just about a year before the election, when things are starting. Hey, by the way, let's start doing this.
Well, he just made this phone call in June.
So these processes you think are so important take 4 months. We should even start acting.
We just learned about the phone call, and now we're learning about there were other phone calls. He was on the phone with the leader in China, maybe saying the same thing. At what point do Republicans and listen? I'm somebody who, on the left side of things, has had in many instances, to have to stand up against someone who I like, who I respect, and say, you have done wrong. Kwame Kilpatrick, someone I knew most of my life, I had to, when he clearly crossed the line in terms of his behavior, I had to say, this is not okay, and you cannot continue in the job that you've had because of that. That is what leadership is about. That's what character and morals are about. I am really upset that Republicans on the other side of the aisle cannot do the same thing with somebody who's so.
I just don't think comparing Donald Trump to Kwame Kilpatrick and his behavior.
Oh, I think it's an insult to Kwame Kilpatrick.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I didn't know you could do that.
I've only got about a minute left, but I want to quickly get to what happened this past weekend in Lansing. You know Gretchen Whitmer well. She was your counterpart when she was on the minority side in the Senate. Almost $1 billion in line item vetoes, and some of them on some glaring things that a lot of people are behind, like Pure Michigan, autism, research and funding. What is she up to here?
It's a tactic. It's the way that she goes about things. She and I have negotiated in the past. We negotiated publicly differently than we did privately. I think she's a better private negotiator than she is a public one. Okay. But she's saying, okay, you want to cross the street, then you might get hit by a bus. Bang, there we go.
We've seen this before in Lansing, and his name was John Engler. This idea that if you don't do what I need you to do, there's going to be consequences, and they will be personal. If you look at the vetoes she took and how they hit members of the Republican caucus, that's what she's up to. And look, I can't say that's a faulty approach.
I got to go to a break. If you two want to go out to breakfast or brunch together, it's on me.
All right,
this is Flashpoint on Local 4. We come back, we'll talk about the Freedom of Information Act in Michigan.
Broadway's Come From Away is a Best Musical winner all across North America. Celebrate the best of humankind and the best in all of us.
Now through October 13th at the Fisher Theater. Get tickets now.
To those who say we can't build a healthy economy while protecting the environment, DTE Energy has something to say. We're already doing it. Because DTE is on pace to reduce carbon emissions by more than 80%. We're adding billions of dollars to Michigan's economy and providing thousands of jobs. Because you don't get to the forefront of cleaner, efficient energy by talking about it. Get there by doing it. DTE Energy.
Not one or two, but 3 times your tax. For 2 final days, Gardner White triples your discount. Solid wood dining, solid pine beds, power reclining leather. You get a triple tax discount on top of the sale price on everything. Your savings could be 50 to 80%. And it's easy to buy, with 5 years interest-free and not a penny down. Payments from just $10 a month. What are you waiting for? It's your last chance to score a triple tax discount paid right back to you. Save more money on the best furniture, period. Only at Gardner White.
You know it's coming, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Insulate before it's too late.
With Michigan winter being so unpredictable, you can't afford to put off insulating your home another winter. Call Ace & Sons today.
Monday at 5, it's a risk no athlete is immune to.
After a couple plays, I was acting a little weird, was a little woozy.
You might have difficulty remembering things, or have headaches, or have issues with your vision.
Concussions.
Nothing scares a parent like the phrase brain injury.
So what should parents do? Pull them out of sports?
Everybody's worried about it and frankly scaring people unnecessarily.
Find out how to make the right choice. Monday on Local 4 News at 5.
Next Saturday, the Detroit chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists are going to hold a FOIA festival at Wayne State. Now, if that sounds a little less exciting than Coachella, I understand. But for Michigan journalists, it is a terribly important matter. Michigan is often ranked as the worst state in the country when it comes to government transparency. We're the only state that exempts the governor's office and the state legislature from the Freedom of Information Act. Let's talk about it with Kat Stafford, the government reporter for the Detroit Free Press, and Chad Livengood, back with us again, the senior editor for Crane's Detroit Business. Kat, this is I know for a lot of people this doesn't matter to me. This really only matters to reporters. Citizens, anybody can use the FOIA. This matters to all of us, doesn't it?
Exactly, and that's really why we wanted to host this event, Devin. The FOIA is not just for journalists, it's not just for lawyers, it's also for citizens. Citizens regularly file FOIA requests. They try to get information, and the goal behind this was to show residents how you can use this, how you can be better equipped to use this for yourself. So we're going to have a day full of events, for residents, journalists, so they can learn the basics of the FOIA and how to use it better.
What are the kinds of things that a citizen should know that they can FOIA, that they can get information on? What are the kind of things we're talking about?
So as a reporter, I get a lot of questions from readers who say, well, how can I use FOIA? I see that in your stories, you're always using FOIA, so how can I do it? And I have helped people get FOIA requests done for things related to water department issues. You know, one of the greatest issues in the city is water shutoff. So a lot of residents are looking for information around that. So we're going to have one panel that specifically deals with residents who have been successful filing these requests.
Chad, Michigan is unique, though, in how far our freedom of information laws go. They don't get you very far around Lansing.
No, they don't. I mean, we have this strange situation where you can file FOIA requests with the Department of Environmental Quality or with the Transportation Department, and you can get emails that those bureaucrats send to the governor's office, and that's the only way you can get emails related to things that the governor's office is sending, because you can't send that same request to the governor's office. You can't send the same request to the legislature.
Not direct.
So we have a situation where we have constituents, and that's sometimes the guys and shield here is that constituents are sending emails to the lawmakers with their issues. But what in reality is those constituents also are lobbyists for special interests, corporations who want to basically make their voice be heard to the lawmaker, and sometimes they're also the people who also write checks to their campaigns.
Right.
And we don't have any way to find that information out. Very rarely do we get a real good scope and look inside the email activity of the legislature and the governor's office.
What's the likelihood of a change on that front? It needs a constituency, and I don't have to tell you, the three of us are very proud of what we do, but we know that it's a profession that's under assault right now from a lot of people.
There are a lot of people that introduce these bills both sides of the aisle every year. There's usually just 2 or 3 people on both sides that kind of like are advocates, and leadership basically hasn't taken this up. Or if they do, they start passing a bill that has a lot of carve-outs. I mean, last year there was an attempt. There was going to be a legislative open records law, and it had all kinds of carve-outs that would basically let any kind of constituent email be shielded, and you could and there was really not a really good definition for what a constituent is.
Kat, as a government reporter, I can't imagine how many FOIA requests you usually have going at one time, but how often are you frustrated or foiled by the way that the laws are written in our state?
Quite often. A matter of fact, me and a colleague of mine, we just had a story where we filed a FOIA request with the city of Detroit. We were hit with a $225,000 bill. And this again...
$225,000,
yes.
$250,000.
Yes. And this was in connection...
copying fees.
Right. And so when we see that, of course, we're outraged as journalists, but for residents, they should also be concerned because this is preventing them from getting public records that are their right. So that's why we decided to have this event to show the importance and to kind of rally the troops in a sense to get, residents really keyed in on what's happening.
For those who want to go, quickly, how do you get involved next weekend?
So go to sbjdetroit.org so you can get more information. It's from 9 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. at Wayne State University Student Center. And please come out and join us. It's going to be a fun day.
Yeah, and just last point, there's an old saying in Michigan, it's easier to get a handgun permit than records from your government. And to Kat's point, when you put up these kind of financial bills and hurdles, that makes it really hard.
Not a stretch. Thanks, guys, very much for being here. Thank you for being here, too. Meet the Press is next. We'll see you next week on Flashpoint.